Well, good afternoon. I want to welcome everybody to the update to the Commissioner's purchasing policy that was probably long awaited. It's been 4 years since you all have received an update to it. This training today is to, again, update you on the changes to the purchasing policy to help hopefully provide you an understanding to the policy requirements, and also to show you how the process has been streamlined to allow us to update the policy without going back to the Board of Commissioners for approvals like we used to have to do. So we can make them on the fly throughout the year. So what I want you to do is sit back, relax, and get ready to learn everything you want to know about county purchasing, but we're afraid to ask. So again, here's the purpose. Here's the areas that are going to be covered. We're going to do changes and updates. But I'm not going to go through them right now. We're going to hit them as we go throughout the briefing. So we'll hit them. Some of them are administrative. If you've read the policy and everything else, some of them were just changing people's names to update them. Some of them were just adding a commissioner's policy that they've updated. So I'm not going to hit all of them. I'm going to hit the key ones that are really imperative. Direct vouchers, multiple blanket certificates, informal quotes. We're going to go through the munis entries. Some of these you've been using all along, but since we really haven't discussed them in 4 years, I really want to kind of highlight them to some people who may be new, but also to give you a chance to, if you got questions about them that we haven't been in a big group together, give you a chance to kind of ask questions about them. We're going to highlight cooperative bids and proposals. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail. We go through them every day. Everybody's been bidding things out. And so, but there's, we've added a little bit of information. Also on cooperative contracts, we've kind of added a little bit of information on STS contracts, GSAs. So here's a couple of first of the changes that we've updated. The commissioners did update. They had a couple of the resolutions that were about green buying, purchasing of the paper, the 70% paper and everything else. But what they did is they have reaffirmed environmental sustainable programs since Commissioner Boyce is a new commissioner. They felt it was time to reaffirm those programs, kind of make it known to the public that, yeah, those have been out there for a while. So that was just a reaffirmation of those programs. We updated the policy with that. If you look on page 3 of page 2 of the policy, the annual review by the staff and then a memo by the county administrator. That's something new. There's always been the review, but now what we get to do is when the staff reviews it, there'll be the county administrator will issue a memo that says, hi, we've made these changes, or nothing's been updated and the policy is still in effect as it stands. So, but what that does is it goes to later on, you'll see where we can make changes, and then all we got to do is the county administrator then will say, here are the changes, now the policy has been updated. So doesn't go back to require the Board of Commissioners. However, if there's something substantial that requires board action, then we will take that board action. But small administrative things, county administrator can say bless off on them on an annual basis, becomes policy, and we move on. So this is part of the streamlined process I was just talking about. Direct vouchers, nothing has really changed in the policy for this. I don't know how many of you have been using this. It's pretty standard. I haven't had any complaints from the auditor's office, so I assume everybody's playing nice in the sandbox. So again, the biggest thing here is what you want to remember is, for some of you who are new, is that it reduces the number and time of small dollar POs that you have to do. It permits reimbursement of in-county mileage and parking through payroll. So if someone goes to a local conference, turns in a receipt, just all you got to do is do it for the payroll. Don't have to open a PO, like we did for travel, like we used to have to do. But if you look on the policy in page 2, there are some exceptions. It never can be used for recurring expenses or in budgeted items. It's kind of like for those emergency things. You come in, your laptop got broke during the night. You can do something under $1,000 to do that for expenses. Agencies have to ensure that they're in compliance with the data board and the microfilm board. That's kind of important. We really haven't talked about that. That's kind of one of those hidden things in the policy. So if you're going to buy a computer or something, you need to make sure that you get the data board approval of something like that. So just make sure, because you can't use this procedure to circumvent competitive bidding. So just make sure that you follow that kind of policy. So it's critical that we look at that and we make sure that we're in line with that kind of thing, because that'll potentially get us in trouble with the auditor if he comes down and looks at that and then you violated it and he has a recovery for finding against the individual or the agency for circumventing the procurement policies. And that means then that individual, that agency might be liable for those expenses. So that's something to pay attention to. Blanket certificates. Allows the use of encumbering funds for specific purposes. Description should reflect what is used on the blanket certificate. Can't be vague. You need to be somewhat specific about what you're doing. And you need to be cautious not to violate the competitive bidding rules. Cumulative purchases greater than $50,000 per year. If you go look at section 5A in your policy, it is on page, should be on page 5 of the policy. That's where the requirement is for the competitive bidding, and that's where we brought down the solicitation down to $25,000 for the threshold for blanket certificates. That's for the quotes, the 3 quotes. In working with the auditor's office, also with the prosecuting attorney office, it says the threshold, $25,000 threshold, this is for 3 quotes now, remember, 3 quotes, applies for each procurement transaction either by object code or vendor. It says, however, if within the calendar year, the county reaches the 50,000 mark of total purchases for a particular object code or vendor, then the county, generally speaking, must proceed with competitive buys for all future purchases by any agencies for that particular object code or vendor. Now, this is from my discussions with the prosecuting attorney's office. Don't panic. However, the prosecuting attorney's office understands that with our Munis systems, no one agency has the ability to go into Munis, do searches to find out if a particular object code or vendor, when we hit the magic $50,000 mark. Munis doesn't come up and say, congratulations, you now, Barb, have hit the $50,000 mark for the county. You get to do a competitive bid. It doesn't work that way in Munis. I have talked to Robert Caldwell. He is trying to work with our Munis people to figure out how we can run a report that will notify us at the time when we hit that magic mark, or we can run a report that can tell us those things. However, the onus is on you in your agency to track your own object codes and your vendors when you're doing your 3 quotes, for you to know when you hit the $50,000 mark for your own object codes and your own vendors. And then to notify us that I've hit this, I now need to do a competitive bid. So for you to ignore it potentially would put you in violation of the competitive bidding rules and could put you in jeopardy of avoiding competitive bidding. So now, if you're buying things off of state term schedules, off of cooperative contracts, that's the exception out of it. However, if you're buying the object codes under cooperative contracts and you bought $49,000 and you decide to go off the reservation and buy $10,000 under 3 quotes for the same object code, and you award it under a quote system, congratulations, you've now exceeded the competitive bidding. So you have to, it's the totality of it in the same year for the object code or the vendor. So just be careful when you're doing this. You're safe as long as you're buying it under the Cooperative Contracts or STS schedules. So just keep that in mind. So while this is generally speaking the rule, prosecuting attorney understands the limitations of our system, and they will protect us and understand that. Are there any questions on this? Okay. What I'd like to do is to go back, well, yeah. What I'd like to do is go back under the blanket certificates and talk about, and in the code, in the policy, there are several things that we really haven't talked about in a while about what they are and the definition of them. Is we use the terms a lot, but we haven't defined them a lot. Certificate of Availability Appropriations, that's the auditor's statement that's on your PO. If you print one out, you see that certificate down there, this from the auditor's office. That's basically his signature. The state auditor said that equals the county auditor signing your PO, saying that the funds are available under your PO. The blanket certification, if you look in the policy, says it represents the certification of available appropriations. This is not a PO for property, supplies, or services. So it's basically an encumbrance of funds that you are ordering off of. It's like a multi-vendor PO, or it's a single certification for funds. So a blanket certification is not a PO. It's basically an encumbering document that you're gonna, like if you do a blanket certification for office supplies, it's basically you're ordering supplies off of it. Your invoices then become the ordering document, and that's where you pay the auditor off of. So it's not a PO. Then you have your requisitions. When you send in your requisitions to Sharon on the Wednesdays, I go and ask the commissioners to approve your requisitions, and from there we convert them to POs. So just remember, what you're sending me as a requisition, we then convert it, once the commissioners approve it, we convert it to a PO. So that's kind of the process. So just want everybody to understand what the terminology is. You ask for recs, I approve, give you back a PO. And also in there we created a definition of an agency. We felt it was very important in this policy because because of what we were doing and everything, we felt it was important. County administrator felt it was important to define in this term who could use this purchasing policy, who was covered under it. So that's why we defined who the agencies were. Not everybody falls under the purview of this agency. Please stop me if you have any questions throughout this with my presentation. So if you have something, please let me know. Expenditures of funds. That's a lot of the Ohio Revised Code that's in there. Basically what it says, those three say, is you have to have it properly appropriated. It's drawn against an appropriate fund. Auditor certificate has to be obtained before a contract's awarded or an order made. And if a contract extends beyond a fiscal year, you only have to encumber funds only for the current year obligations. So if you award a contract now, all you have to do is award it to the end of the year, not for the following 6 months of next year. So that's kind of what those three says. There are several other things. Is personnel violating the certification process may be personal liable. The county prosecuting attorney may enforce this section of the ORC, and the state auditor can issue or may issue a finding for recovery if you violate any one of those. If you order goods before you have the encumbrance of funds. So it's very careful, I'd say you have to be careful not to try to circumvent the system by trying to order prior to the Board of Commissioners approving your requisition. Preparing a blanket certificate. This is all pretty much standard in there. It's set to a maximum of the object code. There are exceptions. I can do one for, I spend about $2 million a year, a little over $2 million for postage stamps, but it's specifically to Pitney Bowes for mail. That's basically almost like a sole source, so I can encumber like 1.5 million at a time. There's court mandated items that the courts do, that Barb does for court mandated items for attorney fees. Those are court mandated items with ORC, so they can open them for multiple, for like $1 million at a time. They do like 3 or 4 at a time. So those don't have to be in accordance with the competitive bidding rules of 50,000. So there are exceptions to those. You can't use, again, to circumvent competitive bidding. You can't do a blanket certificate for capital goods, for capital items. You can have one that can remain open for the entire year. You can have more than one open. You can open one for office supplies, postage. So you can have multiple ones throughout your whole budget items. If you remember in the old policy, we used to have the object codes for the blanket certificates within the body of the policy. We felt it was better to move it to an Exhibit 1. If you look in your policy, we moved it to Exhibit 1, so we felt it was better. So as we make changes also in the policy on that exhibit, we moved it there. So if we need to add, agencies have requested before that they need an additional object code, that they want to be able to do blanket certificates. The engineers have asked for them before. So as we add them, it makes it easier to update that exhibit instead of updating the body of the policy. So again, this is one that I can work with the auditor on. We can add one to it, and then OMB will work with us if all 3 of us agree. Then again, at the end of the year, county administrator will approve it, and we update the policy. So it makes it easier to add in object codes if some agency feels they need one that they want to add to the blanket certificate. That's not part of the object code guide that the auditor currently has. Informal quotes. This is one Barb's been waiting for a long time. We raised it to $25,000, less than $50,000. 3 quotes, same rules apply. And again, as it says in the policy, you have to obtain 3 quotes, which means you may have to seek more than 3 quotes to obtain 3 quotes. So you may have to solicit 6, 5, whatever to obtain 3 quotes. So you have to look at that. If you're using a state contract, in the policy it says you should maybe get other quotes than one. You have to remember that the state term schedule is based on a quantity of 1. It's negotiated on a quantity of 1 with the state of Ohio. So you can negotiate it to get a better price if you're looking for quotes from them. But you should maybe seek 3 quotes. It's not required. But we have found out, other agencies have found out, if they seek more than, if you can find the same object code criteria on multiple vendors, and you seek them more than one, you potentially could get a better price by competing those on the state term schedule. We have found that to be true. Yes?
What's the difference between an informal quote and a quote?
It's same thing, informal, formal quote. The request for quote, they're just all, it's an informal quote is just you're mailing them out. We only do informal quotes. The county doesn't have a formal quote process.
Some of
Right.
We always had difficulty getting vendors to even respond. I know for like example, our toner quote. I don't know how many people use Data House. It's counted over 25,000, but my guess is there's probably quite a few of us. But in some years, Data House would be the only one responded, even though we went out and solicited 3 vendors. Or, you know, we can't. So you're saying that if we can't get 3 vendors to actually respond, that's not considered a 3 quote?
Well, I would suggest that if you say you went out to 6 vendors and you only got 1 to respond, I would say that you've made a good faith effort to get.
Sometimes it's so difficult, you know, for us to, besides looking, you know, online to figure out who to go and ask to get quotes, you know, from with the Data House. I mean, with the toner part.
Marlise Wicker is our small emerging business coordinator. Marlise, why don't you stand up? And we will, she will be part of the process of part of the informal process is in the policy there's a listing of the different small emerging businesses that we're going to ask you to potentially try to increase your usage of small emerging businesses. And we'll ask Marlise to work with you on some of those toner issues, and if you have other issues, we can have you identify them to her, then she'll seek out small emerging businesses that provide those kind of commodities, and then we'll try to find those businesses that can provide it to you, and see what we can come up with to assist the different agencies that are having those kind of difficulties.
I mean, I'm hoping that we're, you know, that's going to solve, but I can
Right.
see some of them that we wouldn't know.
Understand.
Who to go out there and solicit.
Right, but what we'll do is, again, we'll have Marlise contact you, and if you're having difficulty or you don't know who to contact, Marlise can search the small emerging business, or the databases are listed in there of the Edge and everything else that you can go to plug them in, and we'll assist you in, you know, going through it to figure it out, and then find out who we can quote for those difficult commodities. Any other questions on the quotes? And what we'll do is also is we're going to post the policy and all of the different Excel spreadsheets to our website, and then we'll also post it to the auditor's website under Fiscally Speaking, so you can get it in either place to download those Excel spreadsheets. So they'll be available in both places. Okay. So again, as I was saying, it's a great opportunity to use and support local vendors and small emerging businesses, again, because it's informal. There's no competitive bidding rules required like it is on 30786. So you get to choose who you go to. You get to select the 3, 5, 7 vendors you go to. So if you have a list of small emerging businesses, minority businesses, this is your chance to assist in the inclusion plan and adapting and going to those people. There is still the requirement for the quarterly summary of the small emerging report that you need to send. It will be sent to Marlise. I have her email address at the end and her phone number, so I'll hold it up there at the end for you to show it so you can copy it down. So the same reporting is the same, it just goes to a different address. Report form is the same, just we extended it because we included more small emerging businesses in the definitions, and the definitions are in the policy. Again, this is the same quote form that was in there before. So this is the report form. This is the sample. We've been over this before. If somebody else needs help, that they think they need help to go through how to fill out the report, let me know. We can sit down one-on-one and go through it. This is the purchase order process that's in the policy. And what I mean by the process, this is kind of part of the seven different items of part of the munis formats that are in there. This is the the purchase below the thresholds. These are the different ones. What I'd like to cover in some detail is the sole source that is there. Not many of you request sole source, but it's something that we need to go over. Sole source, I don't know how many of you understand what a sole source is. It's usually a single supplier of supplies or replacement or supplemental parts. And it's usually purchases related to IT or proprietary, or it's something that's really limited to a single source. Usually it's IT, you buy a software. Munis is a sole source. You know, if we need an upgrade from Munis, I can't go out and buy it from Microsoft because it's a Munis IT software. So we have, you know, so those are the kind of things, you know, Motorola radios. I can only have a Motorola dealer fix a Motorola radio. That's kind of sole source. But there is a process that if you think something is a sole source, you have to gather up information, you have to provide it to the purchasing department. We have to review it with you. We have to validate that it is a sole source. We have to do our checks and balances. Then we have to go to the prosecuting attorney and convince him that the prosecuting attorney that it is a sole source. If they buy off on it and they approve it, then we come back to you and say, yes, this is truly a sole source. And then you can go out and buy it sole source. Otherwise, if we don't validate it, then you're going to have to do a competitive bid. You know, every vendor is going to tell you, my item, I make it myself, it's sole source. Well, of course, every vendor makes their own item, but it doesn't mean it's a sole source. So if you think something is one, you need to come to us in plenty of time. Can't be a critical item, I need it tomorrow because I got to buy it. So just understand those kind of things. So in food items, long time ago we went through, and if everybody was trying to buy food and whatever for all kinds of different things, that policies still exist. If you're going to try to buy something for a food fest or a festival or something for your agencies, you have to have a valid food policy approved and registered with a county auditor, and only then can you get a PO approved by the Board of Commissioners, because we have to validate and verify that it's there. So those are a couple of the odd ones that we don't see much, but just so you all know that it's there. So there are 7 notes. They allow for standardized ways of reporting information to the Board of Commissioners for review. They really need to be there in the Munis requisitions prior to forwarding to Munis, to the purchasing department. You really need to have those 7 there. And they really have to be there, because if they're missing information, they will be rejected. And Sharon, they're due every Wednesday at noon. And if you don't call her to tell her that you've got some astronomical excuse of why you can't make it at noon, she will not let you submit them. Correct? Correct. So these have not changed. So unless somebody needs to go over them, I'm going to they're there in the policy. These are the cooperative contracts that most everybody is using. National IPA and TCPN, I put them together because they have merged. If you pull up one, you're going to get the other on the internet. State term. GSA, please be careful when someone calls you up and says, hey, I have a GSA contract. Well, please make sure you check with us, because there's only 2 GSA schedules that we have that we can utilize, and they may have a GSA contract, but if it's not on one of those 2 schedules, 70 and 84, we can't use it. And a lot of people have Schedule 35 contracts, but we can't utilize Schedule 35 contracts. Schedule 1784. So please be careful of that. Again, on state term, remember, they negotiate, state negotiates them on a quantity of 1. So we're allowed to negotiate all of those. And most times when we award a contract under state term schedule, if it's for a service, we usually do a supplemental agreement that we then have you go before the Board of Commissioners on. Data Center is very familiar with our supplemental agreements. And so is the Clerk of Courts. So please come to us if you're buying something so we know if it's not just a piece, parts, or goods, any type of services, we would do something else. Any questions on those? And we also review most of the purchases for one of these because we have to check to make sure of some of the terms and conditions that they awarded under with their other states, that they may have some hinky language that would not apply under state law, under Ohio state law, that might be inconsistent with our own laws. So we would have to negotiate it out before we could buy off of it. These are our formal bids and proposals. You all have done those a lot. I'm not sure I really need to go over those. The one thing I want to make known to all of you and to really reiterate is if you look at requests for information and it's highlighted, italicized, and bold in your policy, is under requests for information. No cost information will be sought during an RFI. It's a request for information only. It's because you're trying to gather information or a market survey, because you want to bid something out but you're not sure what's out there, and it's just you're seeking information, not cost data. Any questions at all? Boy, this is a quiet group. Either you guys have read it all and you know it. That's all I have. Are there any questions at all concerning any of this at all? Well, thank you all for coming.
Do you have the lady's information?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. Right there. Marlise Wicker, she's on the bottom. She's a small emerging business coordinator.